at the moment that Diana, Princess of Wales, has in fact been killed in that car accident.
For decades, the world has scrutinized every detail of King Charles's love life, from his ill-fated marriage to Princess Diana to his enduring bond with Queen Camilla. However, behind the public spectacle lies a truth that has remained buried for years. Now, at 76, the monarch has made a rare and deeply personal confession, one that shatters long-held assumptions about the true love of his life. In a moment of vulnerability, Charles has unveiled emotions long concealed by royal duty, revealing regret and unspoken truths. Could this revelation rewrite history's perception of a man once torn between love and obligation? New insights emerging from royal insiders, forgotten private letters, and unseen moments suggest a different reality, one of passion, sacrifice, and perhaps even lingering sorrow. So, what triggered this emotional confession, and how does it change everything we thought we knew about the most talked about royal love triangle in modern history? Looking back at his most defining relationships, Charles has finally acknowledged the love that shaped and haunted his life. But did it all begin with Diana, or was his heart elsewhere from the start? In the autumn of 1977, fate quietly set the stage for one of the most scrutinized royal relationships in history. Prince Charles, then 29 and heir to the British throne, crossed paths with Lady Diana Spencer, a shy 16-year-old girl from an aristocratic family. It wasn't the beginning of a passionate romance or a grand royal match, but rather a casual encounter at Althorpe House, the Spencer family estate. At the time, Charles wasn't interested in Diana. He was romantically involved with her older sister, Lady Sarah Spencer, a relationship that ultimately faded into history. Diana, still just a teenager, was little more than a passing acquaintance, untouched by the weight of royal expectations. However, something about her innocence and sincerity lingered in Charles's mind. It would take 3 more years before their paths truly intertwined. By then, Diana had transformed from a reserved teenager into a poised young woman, exuding a quiet charm that captivated not just Charles but the entire nation. Unlike the experienced women Charles had been linked to in the past, Diana seemed untouched by cynicism, a quality that made her the ideal future queen in the eyes of the royal family. But was she the woman Charles truly loved, or was his heart still entangled elsewhere, even as he moved toward marriage? Their courtship officially began in the summer of 1980 under circumstances that felt more like duty than destiny. At the time, Charles, now in his early 30s, faced mounting pressure to settle down. His bachelor status had long been a subject of public speculation, and the royal family was watching closely as he entertained potential brides. Diana seemed perfect, aristocratic, graceful, and untouched by scandal. More importantly, she was adored by the public. Yet, for a brief moment, their relationship carried glimpses of warmth. Charles, typically reserved, found himself drawn to Diana's ability to connect with people, a trait he himself struggled with. One of the earliest displays of affection came during a polo match when Charles placed a reassuring hand on Diana's back as they navigated the growing crowds. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was a glimpse into a dynamic that the world would later dissect endlessly. However, was it love or mere performance? Behind the carefully curated public moments, tensions were already forming. Charles was a man deeply entrenched in duty, shaped by a lifetime of royal expectations. Diana, on the other hand, was a young woman still discovering herself, unaware of the storm she was stepping into. There were private glances, hushed conversations, and moments of tenderness, but was it love, or was it the weight of royal expectation pulling them together? They were two people caught in the tides of royal expectation, and history would prove that love alone would not be enough to hold them together. Now, decades later, Charles's emotional confession at 76 sheds new light on those early years. Did he ever truly love Diana in the way the world wanted him to, or was his heart always yearning for another? Even as he moved toward the altar, the world once believed in their fairy tale, but Charles's revelation now raises a painful question: was Diana ever really the love of his life? By the summer of 1980, the relationship between Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer had evolved from a polite acquaintance to something more defined, at least in the eyes of the public. The British press had already begun speculating about the possibility of a royal match. However, behind the grandeur of royal tradition, the reality was far more complex. Charles, now in his 30s, was under increasing pressure to marry. The British royal family, steeped in tradition, expected him to find a bride who embodied dignity, grace, and unquestionable loyalty to the monarchy. Diana, at 19, seemed to fit that mold perfectly. She was aristocratic, well-mannered, and most importantly, she was adored by the public. Unlike Charles's string of previous scandalous relationships with older, more experienced women, Diana was seen as the ideal match. The young woman, with her shy demeanor and genuine warmth, captured the hearts of a nation, and in her, they envisioned the perfect future queen. Unlike the others, Diana was perceived as someone who could embrace the role of future queen without controversy. Their courtship was brief but highly publicized. Diana was often seen accompanying Charles at royal engagements, smiling for cameras as the press speculated about an impending proposal. Behind the palace walls, however, the prince, though deeply respectful of Diana, remained emotionally guarded. His affections were displayed in small, measured gestures, placing a guiding hand on her lower back as they navigated crowds or offering a reassuring glance during public appearances. Diana, by contrast, was open with her emotions, expressing genuine admiration for the man she believed she was falling in love with. These were fleeting moments, but they were enough to convince the world that a love story was indeed unfolding. But was Charles truly falling in love with her in return? By February 1981, the engagement was announced. The moment was orchestrated for maximum public impact, with Diana appearing in an iconic royal blue dress, smiling radiantly beside Charles as cameras flashed and reporters pressed for details. The couple presented an image of happiness, but beneath the surface, was it true love or a carefully crafted illusion? The engagement of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer was initially portrayed as a perfect union, a fairy tale romance that captivated the world. However, one fateful moment during their engagement announcement shattered this illusion. When asked by a reporter if they were in love, Diana enthusiastically responded, "Of course," while Charles hesitated and replied, "Whatever in love means." Though dismissed by some as an awkward remark at the time, in hindsight, it foreshadowed the emotional detachment that would define their relationship. Now, at 76, Charles's emotional confession forces a reflection on this critical juncture. Was the engagement truly built on love, or was it merely the fulfillment of royal duty? Diana openly admired Charles, yet his affections appeared measured, as if shaped more by expectation than deep emotional connection. Despite the apparent emotional distance, there were moments of tenderness. Charles would sometimes place a hand on Diana's during private conversations or send handwritten notes expressing admiration for her growing confidence in the public eye. These gestures suggested some level of fondness, but they were overshadowed by an undeniable truth: Charles's heart had always belonged elsewhere. As history unfolded, what once symbolized hope became the beginning of a far more complex and challenging journey. Decades later, Charles's reflections bring a new depth to those early days, shedding light on decisions shaped by duty rather than desire. His emotional confession at 76 casts a different perspective on what was once celebrated as the wedding of the century. On July 29, 1981, as the world watched in awe, Charles and Diana exchanged vows in a grand ceremony witnessed by over 750 million people across 74 countries. St. Paul's Cathedral, chosen for its capacity to accommodate more guests than Westminster Abbey, bore witness to a spectacle of royalty at its finest. Diana, embodying the fairy tale princess in an ivory silk taffeta gown with a 25-foot train, stepped out of the carriage to deafening cheers. Yet beneath the grandeur, cracks had already begun to form. As she walked toward Charles, their eyes met briefly. Was it a look of love or obligation? Charles maintained composure, but his expression appeared tense, mirroring the weight of responsibility he carried. Even the vows hinted at underlying strain. Diana mistakenly reversed the order of Charles's names, a minor slip but one that fueled speculation about their connection. Meanwhile, Charles notably omitted the promise to obey his wife, a break from royal tradition that some viewed as progressive but others saw as an unspoken statement about the power dynamics in their marriage. Though the world fixated on the grand spectacle, those attuned to royal norms saw these details as telling signs of deeper struggles. The illusion of a perfect love story continued with the newlyweds' carriage ride back to Buckingham Palace, culminating in the historic balcony kiss. Though brief and hesitant, it was enough to send the crowd into a frenzy, sealing the fairy tale narrative. However, Diana later admitted she had felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness creeping in, overshadowing the day's joy. The pressures of royal life, the weight of expectation, and the growing emotional chasm between them loomed large. Now, as King Charles makes a deeply personal confession, it reframes the significance of that day. Was he ever truly invested in the love the world projected onto them, or was he, even then, grappling with the reality of a decision driven by duty rather than desire? At the time, few dared to question the fairy tale, but history would reveal that the wedding was not the start of a perfect union, but rather the beginning of a journey filled with challenges, regrets, and unspoken longing. Parenthood was one of the most defining aspects of Charles and Diana's marriage, raising the question, did the arrival of children bring them closer or only magnify their emotional distance? The birth of Prince William on June 21, 1982, was a moment of immense joy, both for the royal couple and for the monarchy. The arrival of a direct heir to the throne was a significant event, and the world watched as Charles and Diana proudly stood outside St. Mary's Hospital, presenting their newborn son. Diana, despite her exhaustion, radiated warmth, while Charles, typically reserved, showed visible pride. A rare public display of affection came as he placed a hand on Diana's back, an intimate gesture that suggested a fleeting moment of unity. For a brief time, it seemed as though their marriage had found renewed purpose. 2 years later, on September 15, 1984, Prince Harry was born. If William's birth symbolized royal continuity, Harry's birth carried a more personal significance for Diana. She affectionately referred to him as her little Spencer, emphasizing his resemblance to her side of the family. Charles, however, had reportedly hoped for a daughter. Upon seeing Harry for the first time, he is said to have remarked, "Oh, it's a boy, and he's even got red hair." His reaction, though likely unintended as hurtful, hinted at the underlying emotional distance that persisted in their relationship. Even in moments of familial joy, the cracks in their marriage continued to widen, leaving unanswered questions about love, duty, and the sacrifices made in the name of monarchy. Charles's initial reaction to Harry's birth, though later misinterpreted, did little to soothe the growing tension between him and Diana. To her, it felt like a dismissal rather than a moment of shared joy. Though Charles eventually adored Harry, his first words upon seeing him, a remark about his red hair, served as a small yet painful reminder of the emotional disconnect between them. Beyond the public smiles, the strains in their marriage were becoming more pronounced. Parenthood brought happiness, but it also magnified their differences. For Diana, motherhood was everything. She was deeply invested in her sons, finding her greatest purpose in them. Fiercely protective, hands-on, and emotionally available, she embodied warmth and devotion. Charles, on the other hand, had been raised under a strict, duty-driven monarchy, where emotional restraint was the norm. His idea of parenting was far less affectionate, with royal responsibilities often taking precedence over family life. Though he loved his sons, he struggled to bridge the emotional gap that Diana so effortlessly filled. Their vastly different approaches, Diana leading with emotion while Charles remained reserved, highlighted an ever-growing divide, one that would later become a source of regret for Charles. As Diana devoted herself more to her sons, she also felt increasingly isolated. The pressures of royal life, combined with the unspoken tensions in her marriage, created an emotional chasm. She longed for companionship in parenting, for a partner to share the journey with, but Charles remained emotionally distant. Looking back now, does King Charles regret not being more present in those early years? Did he ever fully appreciate the depth of Diana's love for their children? Though their marriage unraveled, their love for William and Harry remained a binding force, one that even history could not erase. For decades, King Charles's love life has been defined by two women, Diana and Camilla. Now, at 76, his emotional confession forces a reconsideration of one of the most painful truths of his past. Did Camilla Parker Bowles ever truly replace Diana in his heart, or was she simply the woman he was allowed to love? As the years passed, the once celebrated marriage of Charles and Diana deteriorated under the weight of duty, expectation, and emotional distance. But the greatest challenge they faced was Camilla. Long before Diana, there was Camilla. Charles and Camilla's connection dated back to 1970 when they met at a polo match. Their bond was strong, but timing was never in their favor. In 1971, Charles's naval duties led to their separation, and by 1973, Camilla had married Andrew Parker Bowles, leaving Charles reportedly heartbroken. Yet, despite moving forward with their respective marriages, their connection never truly faded. By 1978, they had rekindled their friendship, and by 1986, their bond had evolved into something more. Though Charles was married to Diana, his involvement with Camilla went beyond mere friendship, and Diana knew it. She later admitted she had sensed the emotional distance from the start, the whispered phone calls, the knowing glances, and the undeniable presence of Camilla in Charles's life. In 1989, Diana confronted Camilla, telling her, "I know what's going on between you and Charles. I just want you to know that I know." But the confrontation provided no closure. Camilla wasn't going anywhere, and neither was Charles's love for her. The strain on Charles and Diana's marriage only deepened, leaving Diana feeling immense pressure, loneliness, and unhappiness. The constant media scrutiny and the weight of royal expectations compounded their struggles, making reconciliation nearly impossible. By the early 1990s, their marriage had reached an irreparable breaking point. What had once been a highly publicized romance had devolved into an emotionally strained partnership, unfolding under relentless media scrutiny. The distance between them was no longer just symbolic, it was an undeniable reality. In 1992, their official separation was announced, sending shockwaves through the monarchy. For Diana, it was an emotional battlefield she had fought alone for years. The final blow came when she sat down for the now infamous BBC Panorama interview, where she openly discussed the pain and betrayal within her marriage. Her statement, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," became one of the most defining quotes of the royal saga. Public sympathy overwhelmingly sided with Diana, further complicating Charles's position. The monarchy, once revered for its mystique, now faced an unprecedented crisis of image and trust. Their legal divorce was finalized on August 28, 1996. Diana, stripped of her royal title but not of her dignity, walked away as the mother of the future king. Charles, still bound by duty, was left to navigate the wreckage of a love story that had crumbled under the weight of expectation. The divorce was both an ending and a beginning, for while it severed a broken union, it also allowed Charles to embrace a future with Camilla Parker Bowles. Yet, even after all was said and done, Diana remained an unshakable presence in his life and legacy. Now, at 76, as Charles reflects on the past, does he regret how things unfolded? Was Camilla truly his one great love, or was Diana the woman he never fully understood until it was too late? His emotional confession suggests that, even decades later, the shadow of Diana still lingers over his heart. For years, the world speculated about the depths of Charles's emotions, what he felt, what he regretted, and what he buried beneath the weight of royal obligation. Now, at 76, his emotional confession forces a reconsideration of everything once believed. Did he ever truly move on from Diana, or, after decades of silence, is he finally revealing a truth that was once impossible to admit? On August 31, 1997, the world awoke to an unthinkable tragedy: Princess Diana was gone. The car crash in Paris that took her life was more than just an accident, it was a moment that changed history. The world mourned as if they had lost someone they personally knew. The news sent shockwaves across the globe, but nowhere was the impact felt more deeply than within the walls of the monarchy. Deep within the British monarchy, the weight of Diana's passing was both personal and politically charged for Prince Charles. Though their marriage had ended, their connection through their children and shared history remained undeniable. For years, their relationship had been scrutinized, dissected, and judged, but now there was no more time for resentment, no more distance, and no second chances, only the reality of finality. Charles was at Balmoral Castle when he received the devastating news, responding with quiet grief, yet duty pressed upon him. He was no longer just an ex-husband, but the father of Diana's children. No longer just the future king, he now bore the responsibility of bringing her home. And perhaps, for the first time, he truly realized how much she had meant to him. Against initial hesitation from the royal family, Charles insisted on personally retrieving Diana's body from Paris. In that moment, his actions spoke louder than words. He could have delegated the responsibility, but he chose to go himself. Some viewed this as an unspoken confession, an acknowledgement of what she had meant to him, even in estrangement. Others believed it was the closest he would ever come to admitting his regrets. Public mourning erupted in unprecedented ways, while the royal family's perceived cold response intensified scrutiny. Queen Elizabeth's silence fueled public outrage, and Charles, often seen as the distant husband, found himself navigating a storm of emotions and politics. Yet, what the public did not see were his private reflections, revealing a different story, one of remorse and deep contemplation. Diana's death forced Charles to confront the past in ways he had long avoided. Despite the challenges of their marriage, he had always admired her charm, her warmth, and her effortless connection with people. Even after their divorce, he recognized her enduring influence, particularly in their sons, William and Harry. Her legacy lived on in the way they carried themselves, in their approach to the public, and in their defiance of royal traditions. And perhaps, deep down, Charles knew she had changed him too. Now, at 76, Charles reflects on a lifetime of choices, duty, and love, and his confession has left the world stunned. New insight reveals a more complicated truth. Those closest to him say that in private moments his emotions slip through, an expression of sorrow when Diana's name is mentioned, a realization that her presence has never truly left him. Despite his enduring love for Camilla, Diana remains the one presence he cannot escape. Now, after decades of composure and restraint, King Charles has finally spoken words that have shocked the world. "I loved her." A simple phrase, yet one that perhaps should have been spoken long ago. Was it a confession of guilt, of longing, or of a love that was never fully realized until it was too late? Or were they merely the words of a man reflecting on a life that could have been different? Perhaps Diana truly was the love of his life, the one he never fully understood until she was gone. Perhaps Camilla was the woman he was allowed to love, but Diana was the woman who forever defined his heart. The full truth may never be known, but one thing is certain: King Charles's emotional confession at 76 has reignited the debate over the most complex love triangle in royal history.